Stanford University.
Hi, gang. So, my name is Ben Gordon. I'm a venture capitalist, and what I'd like to tell you about venture capital, it's really easy to be a mediocre one, and it's very difficult to be a good one. And I've only been doing it for 2 years, so I think I've gotten all the way to mediocre. Previous to this, I was at Electronic Arts for 26 years. I helped write the original business plan. And then over the course of it, I did stuff at universities. I held the first endowed chair in video game design. That was at USC, go Stanford. And so I've been in classes before. And I got to tell you, the one thing that I believe in university is the professor should not be able to give A's, only a B+. And if you're any good, you should be able to get an A from the real world. And a professor could bring in the real world to you if necessary. So, you know, at the best, I would be bringing in the real world. And instead, I may just be, you know, entertainment so you can relax for the next hour. You guys have correctly figured out that the way to do big things in the world is to pick moments of disruption. I would advise you do something that 35-year-olds don't know how to do. And I think the always connected mobile is something that you have an advantage over, as you do with social networking and other things still to come. So when iPhone launched, I gave this poem to Steve Jobs. He was not amused. I think in general, he does not think at this stage in life that he has to sit still for any poetry. So I'm not even going to read it to you. I'm just going to let you know that you're only 2 years past one of the most disruptive moments in technology in the last 2 decades. So there is still time. So what I was going to talk about today, is how to be a CEO. There's new rules of being a CEO, and it's because of technology that is new to your generation, or new during your generation. I grew up in the television generation. Television is pretty darn boring now, despite what the Disney Channel is doing, and the WB is doing pretty well. But you're growing up in the always connected generation. Presumably you know things that other people don't know. And glory be, mobile is coming to the West as the new thing. So I want to give you some ideas about, how many of you are thinking of starting a company in the next 10 years? And the rest of you are going to work for someone. So those of you who didn't raise your hand, what are you going to do? Go get a job, teach for America, get a PhD, be a professor. Or just the fact you're here means you're probably not a humanities major, so you probably can start a company or else recruit a humanities major to work for you. I was an English major. I once heard a professor tell me that the good news about college is grades don't matter because 6 months after graduation, the A students are borrowing money from the C students. So let's talk today about CEO 2.0. So these are lessons that I've learned in the company of Bezos, Mark Pincus, who founded Zynga, and Neil Young, who founded Engimoco, an iPhone company that's 2 years and a few months old that just got acquired by the leading social mobile games company in Japan called DNA, and their lead is Mobagitan. So I encourage you to always think about at what moment in time is there a disruption. And Web 2.0, or what some people are calling Web 3.0, what Pincus calls the app economy, is clearly a new jumping off point. So it's a time that you can seize the moment. Here's some new things. So I went to business school a while ago, back when Stanford was just starting to brag about being the #1 business school. And I think they still brag about it with about the same sense that maybe Harvard might have more prestige. But back then, being a CEO was about process and quality circles and knowing how not to get screwed by Bain with management consulting. Things are different now. You're in a peer-to-peer generation. You're in an always connected generation. But here's the next thing. The good news about going to school at Stanford is you've learned how to be in class with people who are your friends. So Stanford, maybe some profs grade on a curve, but Stanford is not a grade on a curve place. This is a peer-to-peer network. That's the way the real world works, especially in Moore's Law and Metcalfe's Law companies. So you got to assume going forward, there's more jobs than people. All of you are like the #1 draft picks in the NFL draft or the NBA draft, and you ought to feel that way. Or go to like Michael Jordan and start your own company. So the next thing that's new going, so the first thing is people are scarce. You've got to charm them, you can't order them. Any of you basketball fans, Don Nelson is the last coach in the NBA who thinks that he can tell people what to do who are making 20 times his salary. We're seeing a new generation of 35-year-old managers. So you, as an employee, you should be charmed. As a boss, you should be charming. The next thing is I call Design by Darwin. Any of you don't, you should read The Voyage of the Beagle, or read Darwin, the original Darwin, or at least read about evolutionary biology, because machine learning, the original machine of machine learning, is inside all of us. We inherited it from, depending on your religion, we either inherited it from some guy in a galaxy far, far away, or we inherited it from apes. But learning about Darwin is important. The new company and the companies you're going to be involved in have got to be great at processing and testing massive information. The next thing is speed. I learned this as a professor. If you give students 2 weeks, they get the same amount of work done as if you give them a week. You give them a month, you probably get less work done than you give them in a week. So your generation, forget about the ADD generation. You are the 1 week generation. You want to start companies or work in companies that do stuff a week at a time. Most people in your generation can't, beyond a week, things break down. And then the 3 big trends are gamification, mobile, and social. I'll use gamification as if I understand what you know it means. What I think gamification means is a generation who've grown up since 1987 when Nintendo conquered the West, who expect to see the world through Tetris eyes. You expect to see high scores, you expect to see level up, you expect to get bonuses for being in parties in World of Warcraft, you expect badges, and will expect to see that as a surface to everything, including before long Stanford. You may be the last generation of Stanford students who don't get gamified. Right now the game of Stanford is grading, and in 10 years I think it'll be dramatically different. As a CEO, your job is to be a visionary. So Bezos, Pincus, and Neil Young, all of them had, at the start of the company when they brought the first employee in, they had a piece of butcher paper up on the wall, one picture, and said, this is our company for the next 2 decades. In each case, they said, here's a disruption. Bezos said, internet is a disruption in commerce. Pincus said, Facebook is a disruption in entertainment. And Neil Young said, iPhone, before there was an iOS, is a disruption in entertainment devices. The next thing is, your job is to be a missionary, not a mercenary. Here's the difference. Mercenaries focus on squashing the competition, think Oracle. Missionaries think on changing the world one customer at a time, think Apple. If you think about what gets you to go to class, mercenary is do it for the grade, missionary is doing it because you're on a personal quest. Hopefully many of you today here are on a personal quest. As I said about the Don Nelson comment, in this new world where to succeed, you need to have people like you working late and working inspired. The boss is a coach and a helper, not an orderer. And what my favorite line of all time from a professor I worked with, which is from what a professor that I listened to, is, oh my gosh, I'm not boss of the class anymore, I'm turning into an advisor. And hopefully you have some professors like that who are more advisor and less boss. That's one of the reasons you went to school here instead of on the East Coast. At Harvard, professors still think they're bosses and hope they never have to talk to their students. I think at Stanford there's more intermingling. You can even tell at a school by whether you get to call the professor by their first name or their last name. It's by the last name they want to be boss. Some of the ways to scope, one concept called OKRs out of Intel, objectives and key results, transparently shared with everyone. It works great to tell people what you're trying to do. You remember when you were managing your parents, when you're living at home as teenagers, you want to tell your parents what you're going to do as soon as possible, if at all. The next concept is you killed it. When you go into a class like this, you want to know what you have to do to get an A++. When I was doing classes, I said, all you need is 10,000 downloads from your work, and we'll call that an A. And a couple people got a million downloads. So you ought to always know when you're trying to do something what 10x overachievement is, because many of you have potential to be 10x overachievers. You know, by getting into Stanford, you're kind of like 3x overachievers, but you know, college is like going to high school, but more expensive. So what you do afterwards, aim to be a 10xer and ask people what it is. Bezos runs the company at Amazon, not on business outcomes, but on what you get done. So he would care less about grades and more about the quality of what you do every study session. As I said, a weekly pace. My experience is that when people like you get out of college and go to work for a company, somebody says, do this a week. I say, I can't do it in a week, I need 2 weeks. So it's 1 week to do the work, 1 week to avoid embarrassment. You get to be a vice president, it's like 1 week to do the work, 3 weeks to avoid embarrassment. So if you're in a company, make everybody check in a week. If you're a programmer, you want daily check-ins. If you're working with a team member and they say, I'll check it in Sunday night, I'd say, dude, check it in tonight. And I've seen this even in the last 15 years. Video game check-ins struggled to be monthly. And if you play World of Warcraft, it does a push weekly. If you're on Facebook or Farmville, you notice instantaneous pushes. So from here going forward, all pushes instantaneous. Personal time management. You guys right now have some of the most difficult time management ever, but it's single-threaded. I know it feels like a lot of threads, but it's really single-threaded. Where do you have families and you have to worry about being healthy and you want fun as well as work, you're going to have multiple threaded vectors that you need to prioritize. The single best trick is to track your work per week by the hour and see what the percent is and if it matches what you want to do. So if you say, my number one priority is my relationship, count the hours, and if it's not your number one use of hours, it's not your number one priority. And as a boss, don't believe in one-on-ones. Bezos says about one-on-ones, they're for whining. If he'll meet with any employee one-on-one for somewhere between 30 and 60 seconds, and then it's time to bring other people in. So this old rule of, hey, CEOs, talk one-on-one, get out of the ivory tower. The new rule is talk to communities. And when you are running a company, play two jobs. One is the boss and the other is either the CTO, the head of sales, or the chief product dude. So in the Valley right now, it's the product dudes who are creating the most value. A company called Jive that does enterprise social networks, the head of that is primarily a sales guy. And if you want to live in Cincinnati, the brand manager can be the head. If you want to own a house in California, head of sales, head of product, or head of technology. And they're all great, and whichever one you want to do is probably going to define your 20 years. You want a question?
Yeah, why did you move to Cincinnati with brand management?
Oh, Procter & Gamble. The question is, why did I make a joke about Cincinnati? Well, one, I'm from the Midwest, so I think the Midwest is always worth joking about. And Cincinnati is the crown jewel of brand management with Procter & Gamble. I could have said Oakland for Clark's company, but I didn't think of it in time. So some other ideas. Most of you have probably never hired an exec assistant. My experience is everybody I know, the first exec assistant they hire poorly. And I ran into someone who was 20 years older than me who said, Bing, you have no idea how to manage me. I said, you got me. And she said, Sandy Fitzgerald, she says, just shut up and I will tell you. And so I shut up, and she had a Hall of Fame career for 20 years. Bezos and Pincus have what they call a personal technical advisor. If you can ever get one of these jobs with a CEO you dramatically admire, it's a little like being a TA to a professor, except you get to go everywhere. Imagine if you're a TA and you sat with the professor while he or she graded the work instead of you grading the work and then them buying you a coffee. And the final idea is put your office in the middle. So if I was really any good at this, I'd be doing it from right in the middle of you instead of here on a semi-ivory tower. When you start a board of directors, here's a couple ideas. The first is when you are a CEO, your board of directors are like the best uncle or aunt you ever had, the one you go to when you have hard problems, the one that empathizes with what you're doing, the one you went to and you decided, should I go to Stanford or should I go to MIT? And they say, I've known you forever and you really like sunshine. And you say, thank you, because Dad really wants me to go to MIT for some reason because I could play on the football team. This constant updates, so you know now that you used to, if you're on Facebook, how many people on Facebook? Many. Well, you know, you're just used to not only daily check-ins with code, but daily check-ins with your social circle. You're going to want to bring that to work. So do it with your board of directors, do it with your execs, do it with each other. And then back to this role of energizing, it's pretty weird that many people who start companies, they think about the board as someone to fight. It's kind of like a bad parent from a 70s sitcom, and what you want from your board is a parent from a 50s sitcom. And then when you do it, my sense is even when you build a team, you want to be really overt about what everybody's role is, what each person has to do to kill it, what their kind of minimum requirement is, when's the check-in, preferably daily, and what exactly their job is. And it's even a good idea to say, you're the technical gal, you're the creative guy, you're the this, you're the that, and that's kind of like, so you're also going to be the decider on issues. When it comes up, we're going to look at you first, and be as overt about that as you can. You know, you're going to be the back-end person, you're going to be the UX person, you're going to be the person who goes to Apple and gets them to give us things they don't want to give us. You're going to be the person who goes to Sand Hill Road and convinces those guys to give us money even though we got nothing. And just as you know, the teachers you like best, they make you better, and the classes are more inspiring than this one, you want that in a company as well. It is possible. And one way to tell if it's working is to look on the walls. If the walls look like this, you know that the institution doesn't care enough about you. If you go to like the San Jose Sharks locker room or the 49ers training center, you see a lot of inspiring stuff on the walls. So I'm a big believer using the walls. The second thing to do when you start a company is to buy whiteboards. The first thing is to buy computers that really work well. The second thing is whiteboards. So board, I know this is going to, I'm putting it out there because most people your age who start companies do this exactly wrong. And what you want to do is imagine that you're basically paying people to invest in you, to come along for the ride. And you know, you spend a lot of time worrying about which professor is gonna suck halfway through the semester. Just imagine that you're picking professors for 7 years. So spend extra time. Spend more time than you spend picking a professor and less time than a spouse. Because on average, a company is going to last a little longer than a spousal relationship, probably cost you more if it doesn't work, and you'll spend more time awake with your company than you will with your spouse. I like to say when you're putting together a company execs and board, don't hire anybody that you wouldn't pay money to eat a meal with. You won't meet very many people at Stanford who are good at human resources or organizational development. Anybody read Robert Frost, the good fences make good neighbors? HR is good fences make good neighbors. There's a book by Amy Jo Kim called Community Building on the Web. There's a lot of sociology research that the way you start a community tends to last for a long time. Mark Pincus started a company called Tribe, and it went porn really fast, and they could never reel it in. So the purpose of HR early on is to set the ground rules. So if you know somebody who's magic with people and is kind of organized and can't code, stay close to them because maybe they'll become legend of organization building. At Electronic Arts, we put the first set of values on the wall about 2 weeks in, and that's another way to use walls. So I think about when you're building an organization, when you're building a team here, think about somebody who's golden. I like to say gold because it's really shiny and it's easy to do on a reflective screen. It looks more valuable than it is. You add a little reflectivity and a little bit of highlights, and it looks like metal. But if you're doing an organization, you need 3 people who are dominating their work. Here's why. One person, and they kind of own you. That's like, Kobe Bryant ends up being the boss of the coach. You have 2 people, and it's not quite a trend. 3 is a trend. If you have 3 people, now you're at war. Now you're France trying to protect 3 flanks. You want to have kind of 3 flanks protected. And then the next thing is, if you know anybody who wants to be an accountant, they might be going to a different school than this. Maybe they're in the business school. They want to be an accountant and a CFO. They want to be a net ops person. They want to be a lawyer. It's all the people over there in the grad schools. You want those people. Their job for you is to be 100% perfect. It's kind of 0 mistakes. You know that your job as a coder is to have no A-level mistakes, but a lot of mistakes. Hopefully no one ever finds them. They need to be perfect because it's perfectible. As you know, coding is kind of hard to perfect. So you don't need to be perfectible. You need to be better and better and really fast and solve the hard problems. They need to be perfect. And if you're building an organization, just as you're building a team, an organization is just a new kind of machine. So build for the future. So you remember when you first got to Stanford? How many of you undergrads? So half. Well, when you first got to college as a freshman, let me tell you, freshmen get a lot of love now. At Yale, where I have daughters going, you show up with the parents of the U-Haul trailer, and upperclassmen come down wearing T-shirts and singing songs and move you in. If you didn't get that here, you should have gone to Yale. And but then you get advisors, and you get dorm assistants, and you get people you can call on in the middle of the night who will drive you home if you haven't learned how to drink yet. And that's all new. Colleges didn't used to do that. What used to happen is they'd have about 5% of the kids who'd get lost and flunk out, nobody knew why. So colleges have figured out how to do that. When you start an organization, you want to do that. If you start a team here, especially if you want to really jam, you want to start out with making sure everybody's in a good mood and has expressed their goals. I like to think about, and Zappos has done this. Here's Zappos, shoes in the mail. Zappos puts people through their first week and then offers them $2,000 to quit. So if you like your MasterCard line is $2,000 in the hole, get a job at Zappos and stay for a week. I also have this rule of 7 out of 10. I was involved with creating the first intern program at Electronic Arts back in the 90s. And I'd go around to every intern on about their first week in and ask, 10 is the most productive you've ever been. Remember when you crammed for those 3 tests, and at the same time, you repaired your relationship with your boyfriend, and you convinced your parents to buy you a car. That was all in one day. That was probably a 10. A 1 is when you're sitting in a bad lecture, it's a required class for your major, you're looking out the window, and you look up again, and the clock has moved 5 seconds. That's a 1. Your job is to be about a 7. That's a marathon. Any of you are runners, you want to be able to keep bringing it. Jim Collins, who writes Good to Great, talks about this, kind of the art of continuing excellence. You can also succeed if you're ADD. If you're ADD, be an applications engineer, not a systems engineer. So you can go highs and lows, but that kind of highs and lows, Tourette's is better than ADD for programming and company creation. But highs and lows are hard for everybody else. And most people, especially in their 20s, if they think they're doing a 10, other people around are going, oh my God, they're so breaking stuff. So, comment your code. So you don't feel like you're doing 10 when you're commenting your code, but you are. If you're doing code and you're not commenting it, it's going to be worthless, not only to everybody else, but to you. It's a little like writing a poetry at 2 in the morning after substance abuse, and then not being able to read it. That's uncommon in code. And then give people a way to get out. I think about the first quarter, be really overt about what they're about to do. And my experience is people in organizations that don't have a great first month are never great. I think it's your goal in any organization is to have a great first week. A professor knows that her or his job in any class is to have a great first week, because if not, the students melt away like Tahoe snow in July. How's that one? I liked it. Okay, next thing in organization is this notion of promoting within. I like metrics. Zynga set a goal of 15% of people get promotion every quarter. That's kind of stunning. We claim 60% per year, but if you know the joy of compounding, you know it's higher than 60% per year. And I've been able to do that as grown from 50 to 1,400 people. I wonder what that 500 means. I guess I was going to hedge. The next thing is, what I've found with people like you, when you get a job or a school assignment, you want meaningful work. So job definition is really important. Any company that talks about, we give reviews once a year, you know how, that's just not very meaningful. You want to have a really cool job that you can learn from, and then be kind of about the time you're ready to get a new challenge. So it's a little like getting halfway through this class, and then it's too bad Stanford wouldn't give you $3,000 and say, go make 10,000 at the App Store. That would be more of an education than a class. Building any kind of company, there's this, you need people managers. You're a sports fan, you know, a manager's job is to get more out of everybody than they can get out of themselves. And an entrepreneur's job is, as John Doerr says, do more than anybody thinks possible with less than anybody thinks is possible. So it's kind of inventors and organizers. So the manager's job is to make you or the people you work with do their best work, and the inventors are to create new stuff that amazes everyone. A growth organization needs golden processes. So you all do, I mean, if you've got a team, you probably do something like hackathons. There's also the concept of design hackathons. Hackathon's a metaphor for almost anything. And so any organization starts having golden process. Even a team, if you're working with a team of 3 to 5 people, even I would name what you're committed to doing. We're going to have our, I don't know, our Starbucks hackathon every Monday at 8. And it kind of gives metaphors give meaning. Let's see. So then finally here, this notion of be a CEO. So you guys are #1 draft picks. Only go to companies and only start companies where everybody is the boss of something. Mark Pincus invented this language. He had a receptionist at his first company come and say, Mr. Pincus, Mark, he says, I've got this problem. Our phone system doesn't work. And he says, okay, fix it. You're the CEO of phones. She says, but Mark, this is going to cost $400,000 or $500,000. And he goes, I'm not going to spend as much time learning about it as you are. I hope you make the right choice. I'm counting on you. And this was a high school grad, no Stanford degree, and she killed it. She did great. So that's what you want for yourselves, and that's what you want for people you work with. Any of you who haven't discovered Amazon AWS, you should know that everybody that you compete with is discovering Amazon AWS. Your job in any company is only one NetOps crash per decade. What I found is all companies have one NetOps failure. Great companies have one. Other companies have more. And make sure you take a big data class while you're here. Really, really, really big data. Companies who do any good in social and mobile are collecting lots and lots of clicks and then doing unstructured emergent analysis. And you need to, if you can't do it, you need to at least understand what it is. So make sure you understand data structures and the complexity of data structures at scale, because the companies you want to work for or build are going to know this. Even NG Mocha, when they had just a couple of iPhone apps, they captured every pixel move in every game of every moment. So, and they did it primarily to see what they could do differently with people and where people weren't going. So it's dynamic click streaming, and meet somebody while you're at Stanford who's good at big data. And then the next thing is recommendation engines and offer engines. The people that do that aren't very good at it. So take an AI class or know someone in AI. Primarily about filtering and recommending. If you try to make money off an iPhone app, the best way to do it is with virtual goods, and a recommendation engine turns into an offer engine to figure out which customer to offer when. And the concept of A/B flow testing, it's hard to do on Apple. Here's the trick on Apple. If you want to do flow test, you can patch data, you can't patch code. And as you know, all code is data. So architect your app so that it's flow testable, i.e. what you want to test looks like data. Is that clear enough? Remember, it's English major trying to talk to experts. As a CEO, I'm a believer in metrics, but never a single grade that is kind of the calculus of future performance taken at a single point. And I find that it's easier to judge value holistically, and these are the things I discovered that people look at holistically. Engimoco, again, this iPhone company that I had success with, it fast-tracked. The first secret is to be a spokesperson for the disruption. So if you want to stand up, I remember there was a bookstore a long time ago called Crown Books, and they had this CEO would do these crummy TV commercials. He'd go, "Books cost too much." Now you know if you go to his store what his point of view is. So you ought to be able to get up and say, "This iPhone kicks butt on a Game Boy. This is the best thing ever for gaming." Or, it's like, with this phone, you can finally have a good marriage. Or, with this phone, your privacy is safe. And if you can't stand up and do a really crappy YouTube TV commercial of something with passion, you probably don't have a company. So stand for something. And then don't change. You get a lot of points. In the early days of Electronic Arts, we came out on one system, and one line we heard in focus groups, which is the way you used to understand customers. Focus groups, we heard this one kid say, "I steal the games from everybody else. I pay for Electronic Arts." And we're going, yes. And that's a good brand differentiator. The second thing is recruiting. So you're going to find in a couple of years when you're out of here that most of what you learned, you will have forgotten. Hopefully you keep your textbooks so you can look at again. You'll have some projects you've done that you can still learn from. Hopefully you'll have a couple mentors who are professors that you can call up who will continue to be generous with your time. With their time. But you're going to have 5 or 10 people that you're in frats with, that you did projects with, that you're in a class with, that you suffered with a bad teacher with, that you're going to want to stay in touch with and be productive with. I was yesterday with a company called Justin TV. It's 3 Yaleys who used to get paid by the university to host beer parties. I thought that was pretty cool. The parents are going, "What are you doing? Drinking and watching TV all the time?" And guess what? Now they've created a really valuable company. So when you get out of here, the most important thing to do in putting together an organization is get really great people. And you're probably not going to meet any greater people in your generation than you have an opportunity to meet here on campus. So forget about your GPA when you leave. When you leave, make sure you have kind of a PPA. And then speed. When Engimoco started, they wrote their original business plan that in 6 months they're going to launch their first game, which seemed really fast. And instead, they launched it 6 weeks later. There's a guy at the business school who interned at Electronic Arts at Kleiner Perkins and read 3,000 business plans. And he took the money he made for it, went back to school, went to class like you did, but none of you are typing. He was typing in class, he coded, and he created a tower defense kind of game with an ad insertion thing in it. Made a couple $100,000. Stayed with school, got venture capital seed money and sold his company for 12 or 14 million bucks 15 months later. So again, speed. And then for you coding, my experience is most hard code is spaghetti, the first iteration. And then the second iteration, you start to abstract it. About the third iteration, you abstract it. You're graduating in the era of platforms, of virtual platforms. And so the more that you can abstract and modularize from the beginning, the better. At Amazon, AWS was never intended to be AWS. AWS was intended to be a unified platform that actually worked. And they found out that their brains turned to mush when they tried to architect it. It was just too hard. So they modularized and they could architect each module. And then for a fitness function, they used, instead of the boss or a professor, they decided to use the real world. And thus was born AWS. So modular and abstract is really key. And then, commenting out your modules. I keep talking to technologists, trying to get them to tell me to value output by good lines of code. And how you'd even think of a single line of code as being good. And they say, Bing, that's so stupid. Sometimes one line of code is better than 10. And I go, well, that's measurable. Tell me what it is. And some lines of code look unsexy and get used 100 times in 100 different shipping things. Other lines of code change the sales curve. So if you can even understand the value of your different modules, that's also useful. So now so here's the three trends. How are we doing on time anyway? My phone's turned off.
10 minutes.
Okay. What you need to know about gamification is, first of all, how many of you ever played World of Warcraft? How many of you ever played Madden football? How many have played The Sims? How many have played Farmville? So I'm going to assert that you can't be a successful CEO if you're not familiar with kind of the laws of at least one of those. You're going to have trouble recruiting people. You're going to have trouble staying in touch with consumers. So here's the first thing to know is all your customers and all your employees want to be heroes. If you can figure out something, could be game, could be just buffing them out in a great classroom, they're about that'll change behavior 25%. This is Xbox Live. And anything that you create, if users can instantiate themselves with what looks like a profile, that's also a big behavior changer. If you want to convince people that what you're doing is social, we have to see profile pictures. If you don't see pictures, it's not social. The next thing is, you guys all grew up about the age of Pokemon. Then it went to Neopets and Yu-Gi-Oh! There's something really satisfying of life in levels. You want to impose for your customers and your employees a sense of living levels. Basically after you're out of school, life starts being a life in levels. Your spouse doesn't tell you, you've just become spouse 3.0. Gold badge, but they should. And the trick in living levels is you want 90% of people to feel 90% of the way to the next one at all times. And since that's impossible, then you want to have a couple levels going on. Badges, double behavior. Remember your gold stars you got in kindergarten? So if a professor wants to get more out of you, badges work. And then getting into a daily habit. This is something in Farmville. This is a big picture of crops withered because I didn't come back fast enough. A great interface. Learn about toys. It's always a good idea to go to the toy section of a store. If you're trying to create a consumer product, get some toys, put them on a table and say, this is what I'm trying to create, and then figure out how to put them into the interface. It sounds whack. It turns toys into a business expense, and it will jump you up a level, and it always works. And as a matter of fact, this is Sims 2. When customers looked at this screen, they looked at these colorful things down on the bottom, and they instantly thought this was an all-new game with all new code and engineering. So you're going to hate this, but the best interface are things that make old code seem new. It's really hard to do new code. It's really easy to do new UI. User-generated content, you have to figure out how to unlock this. You're going to find in your world that 1 billion is a big number. 1 million's no longer a big number. So Spore launched really good tools. So creating tools is really hard. Any of you create any tools? Creating tools looks easy, is really, really hard. And you need a lot of confidence to make a tool that's going to unlock power for other people. One of the reasons to play Farmville or World of Warcraft is to understand the emotional power that can be intrinsic to virtual goods like coins or purple axes. So a rare axe is still about the only thing you can give to the man who has everything who plays World of Warcraft. When you do it right, this can keep your customers 3 times longer. So Kleiner put $200 million aside for iPhone companies. It's pretty astounding the progress everybody's making in parallel. And there's a class-like community where we get people together and they share ideas. It's growing, the mobile internet is growing faster than anything's ever grown in technology. The connected iPhone, you guys take it for granted, but the world didn't. 5 years ago, it wasn't obvious that people were going to use phones connected to the internet. So here are new use cases. One is a stoplight when you're building an app. Imagine the primary use case is somebody walking. You wish if Stanford had stoplights, you would get it. Walking up the stoplight, seeing a don't walk sign, and then you do this. You got to load the app, get something valuable out of it, and turn it off before the stoplight turns green, or walk, don't walk. So try that. You'll find it pretty useful, especially if you have an app that doesn't load before the light changes. The next thing is this new, the GPS. The world needs more location-aware apps. I'd strongly recommend you try something. Next is Shopper's Friend. I think everybody going into stores is going to have a phone out. And then the final one that's interesting is anything that allows teenagers to have satisfaction without parental approval is good. And the nice thing about iPod is parents don't really approve iPods. They have to approve iPhones. Stuff you can do on an iPod is wildly interesting. I told you about the patchless patch. There's a bunch of new ways to cross-promote. So finally, the CEO of social, we did this thing called the S Fund with this company in Little Cafe Bots. There's a bunch of Stanford PhDs with Yoav Shoam from the AI department. So again, here are disruptions. So using Facebook, good news, you're learning things. One is about newsfeed. Facebook changes the math of its newsfeed about every 6 or 8 weeks. And as you can tell, it's still not right. And you're going to be seeing 15x more potential news feeds in the next couple of years. The whole way that comm channels work, the only ones that really define it well right now are push notification in Apple, requests in Facebook, and various things going on in Twitter. That's still changing, and they're all kind of broken. So think about comm channels with filters and creating augmented meaning is really important. The likes button on Facebook is one of the genius things. So think about, you ought to at least know what they all are now because there's an opportunity for each of you to do something else genius. And privacy on the social web is broken right now. And it's mostly broken because the math is hard. It turns out there's critical mass in social graphs. Twitter and Facebook, after a new person gets 10 people, they stay forever. As you know, if you're in a fraternity or a study group, people can guilt you into doing stuff. And if you have about 5 people guilting each other, nobody ever leaves. That's the secret of Muhammad Yunus, who does microfinance with Grameen Bank. The final thing about social is that cooperation kicks butt on competition. This is very hard for most guys 15 to 25 to understand. You should know that the only people in the world who are primarily motivated by competition are males 15 to 25 and people who think like them. The rest of the world wants to get along. People under 13 hate to lose. People over 40 hate to lose. So cooperate. And then understand, take a pandemic class, understand the math of virality. That'll put into perspective some of the stuff going on. Here's some books I recommend you read so you don't have to go to business school. The top 3 If you read those, you never have to take a marketing class. If you read the middle 3, you never have to take a new business class. And if you read the bottom 3, you'll be hungry for more nonfiction books for the rest of your life. And I answer email. Any questions or improvements? Question, yeah, here.
Can you talk a little bit about how to inspire enthusiasm?
How to inspire enthusiasm is a question. Most things in grown-up life are learned in kid life. And so inspire enthusiasm, here are some tricks. One is nod your head. It's just proven that when you nod your head, that other people start feeling positive. Another is smile. Salesmen all know that if they can touch your skin, you'll be more persuasive. I think it's David Ogilvy, who's my business hero. He's an ad guy. He says, great bosses set exorbitant goals for people. And I think actually for the best people, big, hairy ass, audacious goals are important with celebration along the way and help. I mean, great people want to do great things. And then the next thing in the creative process or in entrepreneurial process, which is also creative, the most important thing is optimism and confidence. It's proven again and again that people who are confident are more creative because they're willing to take risks. And so your job in a team, if you're building a team, have somebody around who's always happy, and teams work better. So, I don't know, enthusiasm can be a little like, who's the guy in Winnie the Pooh that bounces all the time? Is that like Eeyore? There's one guy who's whiny and one guy who's bouncy. So you want a bouncy person around that's enthusiastic, it's catching. And there's a guy named Scott Ross who ran Industrial Light and Magic, the Lucas special effects company. He said, you got to make it okay to let down boundaries. He put a saxophone on his wall, and you find if you go up to people and say, have fun, be creative, it's like they get less fun and less creative. So he'd take a saxophone and just start playing and walk through the halls. Made it safe for everybody. At Electronic Arts, I used to tell people, until your cube looks idiosyncratic, you're voting not to be included. And so, you know, make it safe to have peccadillos. And, you know, innovation matters. We kind of love new stuff. And gold and silver matter. You know, there's a reason that the iPhone wasn't launched in a wood case. So that goes back to the crow in all of us. You know, crows prefer tinfoil to wood. It's the main reason that CDs cost less than vinyl but are priced 50% higher. It's because they're silver instead of black. And good question, though. You can see I'm kind of wandering around listing potential answers. I've seen some books about other stuff, but no book about enthusiasm. Overside, yes?
What are your favorite tricks and tips for re-engaging users on the mobile platform?
Let's see, the best game news, the question is, what are the best tricks for reactivating and re-engaging users, specifically on a mobile platform? The best way to do it on a mobile platform would probably a push that said, I haven't heard from you in a while. I'll buy you dinner tonight. Signed, Steve Jobs. That would engage a lot of people. The best activator in the history of Facebook games was Bing has sent you a lonely cow. Will you adopt it? That charmed a lot of people. So charm helps. A sense of land rush helps. You could be first. I think people hate to lose stuff more than they care about getting new stuff. So that you might lose something seems pretty powerful. On mobile, you know, the world of iPhone right now is is pretty difficult because there's such a torrent of apps that the average app gets used, gets uninstalled in 11 days. And it's hard to have, imagine if the average class at Stanford, people dropped out of in 11 days, the teachers would all go to MIT. So the best way to get somebody, rather than re-engaged, is to come back next time. The number one best way to come back next time is an appointment with friends. The second best way is this harvest mechanic. Make an investment in something that's going to time out. And probably the third best way, which Facebook has discovered, is you see somebody on the sidewalk and say, "Hey girl, what's up?" And you go, you didn't see my post? And that'll get people to go for no, you didn't see my post? I broke up, I flunked out, and I asked somebody to come help me, and you didn't answer. So you hear that once, that'll get you to check in regularly. So a sense that the world is passing you by if you don't check in. But it's iPhone apps, probably the hardest place in technology to retain customers. And another way is to keep a customer across a system, let them bounce between apps, but trade them into another app, which is a friend who will then trade it back. So I guess cross-linking. Question? Yes?
So for valuation, you mentioned basically that there was this guy who started a company, sold he made $200,000 in App Store, and he sold it for $14 million. How did that calculation happen?
Oh, there was a piece. The question is, talk about valuations. Here's the math: $15,000 for the cleared in the summer, invested, paid to a couple people like you willing to do an app to his spec. At the same time, he coded advertising, a serving harness to put around it, and with those two things, he made $200,000 while he's still at business school. So then with that, he went to a venture capitalist and said, "I'll sell you a piece of my company." The venture capitalist said, "Okay." And from that, he basically threw away the game, created an ad service for mobile, which was a gamification of a cross install, and became one of the de facto leads among app publishers on the iPhone, and built that up to higher revenue, and sold that company for the middle teen millions. The number was never announced, so I don't want to out them, but a really good number. And the investors got some, and he and his partner got some. And, now he's thinking about what to do next and when. So there was an intermediate step that I might not have been clear enough about. Last question, yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about how you choose who should be on your board, or who you should invest in you?
Let's see. So the question is, how do you build teams?
And I also have another thing.
Okay. And it's a two-part question.
Two-part question. At what point should you be looking for investors versus using friends?
Another question is, when do you work on other people's money instead of your own? Yeah. The first question about it's basically how do you build a team? So I'd suggest read Bill James. And there's a sense in or either read Bill James or Moneyball. It's about baseball. Teams in baseball have, it's kind of the most interesting team dynamics because everybody bats, but everybody has a different role. And what you want there is in each position, you only play 9 people at once. You want each of them to create more wins than average for their role. And so what you're trying to do is get more wins than average from every role. And then you want the team to be greater than the sum of its parts. And the team being greater than the sum of its parts, that's either magic or it's the leader. And people being great relative to their roles, and it's judgment combined with the past. The past is, I think in U.S. football, last week's performance by a quarterback is highly uncorrelated with this week's performance as judged by quarterback rating. The standard deviation of week-on-week quarter deviation for quarterbacks is really high. The mean is maybe 70, and the standard deviation is like 20. It's like all over the place. the standard deviation of basketball performance as judged by points per game is very low. So if Kobe got 28 points last game, this game he's going to get like 25 to 32. So he's got a standard deviation of 5%. But know in your particular field how predictable the past is, and then have judgment about what's going to change it in the future. And then how do you, there's this test they teach in school about teamwork. The one that I did is you're with 12 people, you crash in a desert, and now you've got to prioritize the survival items. And each individual prioritize, and you get a score. And then the group gets to talk for an hour and reprioritize, kind of do it's called a Delphi method. And a good team is one, when the group works, their score goes up. And a bad team, and MBAs tend to be pretty good at that, because they know how to trade. Engineers tend to be bad at it. They have strong opinions, and they're used to being the smartest person in the room, so they tend to roll over the top of others. And so the question is, how do you get to the whole being greater than the sum of its parts? And there's some people who are just genius at it. And you see again in sports, you try to get a manager's job is to get the whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. The general manager gets the better talent, usually for the same salary cap. So you can see I'm groping for metaphor. And then when do you take other people's money? I think that's kind of it's a life question. You know, do you like being in debt? Do you like having partners? And then, in general, what I found is most people like to have enough money so they don't have to worry about it for some period of time in the future. And for companies, it's about 12 months. If you don't have enough money to guarantee 12 months, it's hard to hire employees who don't owe you something. So if you could figure out how much money you need for 12 months, that's usually about the right amount to have. If you're starting from scratch, what I tell people is pick the date when you're at a comfort zone, and on that date, you got to make a go-no-go decision. Try to set goals in advance. So if you come out here and say, I'm going to start a company, you incorporate it, and give yourself a date. I tell parents of English majors who want to be journalists, I say pay them a salary for 6 months. If they don't have 10,000 followers in 6 months, fire them and make them get a job. And now we're done. Thank you very much, and goodbye from Stanford University in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.